Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmont, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. It's nice to be with you here today. Thanks for having me back.
Are we like doing auditions?
We are week to week.
Oh,
it
okay.
really is
Yeah,
week to week.
The biggest issue, it's not because whether or not I'm going to fire him. He keeps waiting for the paycheck to clear. There's no paycheck.
Yeah, firing suggests. So Gerrit, we did a part one of Unsung Heroes from church history, and so we're gonna get back into that here, but we do have a couple of short emails from the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag. We haven't done an episode on Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown, by the way.
No, we're saving her. She's for the millennium. We talked a little bit about her and her
did a
Mormon
little bit.
battalion self.
Like she is.
She's
incredible.
She is like essentially the Indiana Jones of early Latter-day Saint history. And in a lot of ways, she's like a Latter-day Saint Forrest Gump. Like she
was everywhere.
Yeah. So everything you're like, oh, what about the Mormon Battalion? I was on that. You were a woman and you're on it. Yeah, I went the whole way too. I wasn't like all these other people that just like stopped off halfway or got tired. Oh, my feet hurt. I'm walking through Arizona. I don't want to go. No, she went the whole way.
Yeah, came back, was a postmaster in Draper.
I mean, I don't know how she got the job named Draper. Interesting, but
all right. So this first email comes from Andrea or Andrea or I apologize.
Yeah, we don't know how to pronounce. We don't know how to pronounce our own names, let alone anyone who emails in. You know, like, oh, you actually have to put the accent on the N. It's Andrea.
So part of the reason that we're sensitive to that, with the last name Leduc and Dirkmont, our names are never pronounced correctly,
right.
And so we're especially sensitive. I ran into a Dutch member of the church at the Leighton Temple Open House last night.
There's Dutch members of the church.
She ran into a mission companion of hers, actually. It was interesting. I said, "Oh, my best friend is Dutch," and I said, "His name is Gerrit Dirkmont." And she said, "Oh, that's the most Dutch name I've ever heard."
There you go. That's right.
There you go. All right, so this comes to us from Andrea or Andrea. Hello, this is from an old podcast, but I loved that you called yourself the Calvin of camping. Because as you were discussing the Calvinist doctrine, I thought this is the most depressing doctrine I've ever heard of. And then you talked about camping, which is a sore spot. My husband hates camping. I was thinking life.
Married to a good man.
I was thinking life was a Calvinist would be depressing as life without camping.
Oh wow!
It was funny and meaningful to me, and lightened my heart to hear the great dislike of camping is such a real thing. So,
wow,
it's very nice.
Well, what a kind email to send in. Look, obviously, a lot of what I do is a little bit facetious.
But you do.
Oh, I look. It's not because I haven't tried it. Like people are like, well, you let me take you up into Howell Winters, and you'll change your mind. And I'm like, no. I mean, like
you're from rural Idaho.
I grew up in rural Idaho. Like we had campouts every month as a kid growing up. Like we literally we camped out 9-10 times a year. I mean, and then, my dad, I guess trying to relive his refugee status from World War II, he also liked camping. My dad, I mean, at one point in his life when he was a teenager, was living in a root cellar with no electricity
in Kansas.
In Kanab.
Oh, Kanab.
In Kanab, Utah. And I don't know if maybe he developed a taste for it, but he would like to try to go camping. I will always remember the time. I shouldn't even tell this story, but he's gone now.
Yes,
but he's probably listening.
Oh, he and your mother are two of our top listeners.
So my mom still alive. Just if anyone's tuning in, like, oh no, his mom passed away too. No, Renee's still alive, or at least at the time of this recording.
It's possible he's also astonished, like Elder Kieran's mother-in-law.
Yeah, totally astonished. We were at a campground in Chalice, Idaho. Do you know where Chalice, Idaho is?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful hot springs.
Yeah.
Right up there on the, it is rugged terrain.
A friend of mine married someone from Chalice, Idaho, and when he told me that she was from Chalice, I said, "Wait, she's from there, or she goes camping there?" I didn't think anyone actually lived
it's
there.
very nice.
Anyway,
so he was pulling it. My dad was backing. He would throw a camper on a camper shell on his old F-150 trucks that he would have, the 1970s one. And that's how we did most of our family vacations, was in this camper shell. And all the kids would just ride in there.
Oh,
the one that goes over the top, like the
I know.
the bigger ones.
And you're just in the back. Does it have some bedding or anything?
Yeah, up on the top. So we always would kind of fight to have the mattress that was up above the cab of the truck.
Oh yeah. One of those.
So you could sit up there and you could see where you were going.
Wearing your seatbelts, obviously.
And then because you had the extended cab, you could always go into the truck.
Yeah, right.
But there was like the cushioning in between, and you'd open up. Hey, Dad, are we going to stop somewhere? Shut up! I told you to. I don't know. Probably that is what happened. Like, shut that! I told you to. Whatever. Anyway, my dad was backing into a parking spot for the camper, and he totally slammed into a tree. And I mean, he didn't just glance off a tree and looks like we scraped a tree. Anyone who's ever owned a trailer or a camper or a fifth wheel or anything has had branches of trees hit the side of it.
So I rented an RV. I took the family on a trip down to Southern California, Arizona, back up. And one of the things we did in Southern California is we went to many of the spots where The Office was filmed.
Oh.
And we went to Poor Richard's pub.
As opposed to Scranton.
Well,
which is what I was told it was.
Well, so
filmed.
some of the things were done in Scranton.
I feel like I've been lied to my entire life. Speaking of which, our tour is actually going through Scranton.
It actually is.
Yeah.
Yes, we have. So my family, we've been to Scranton as well. My family's a fan
sorry,
of the show.
I digress.
Well, no. So we're a fan of the show, and so we went to the Scranton locations, and then we went to the Los Angeles locations, and we were going to Poor Richard's pub, and I drove directly into a tree that went right through the fiberglass on the side, and
it cut into it.
Oh, it drove right through. Yeah, absolutely.
So you and my dad are kindred spirits.
$3,000 in damage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad didn't have the budget to fix it, so he's backing into the spot. And I mean,
I also didn't have I didn't budget. Hey, I'm going to crash into this tree.
Well, so we were still in the camper.
So was my family.
Right. So we're in the camper as it's backing out. I'm playing, I believe, He-Man with Dallin. We had Masters of the Universe,
of course,
toys.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a tree comes into the camper because he went into this tree. So, you were asking about Calvinist hell. Anyway, Andrea, I mean, obviously, I still occasionally, when my wife forced me to go camping, I do. But a lot of that is obviously very, very tongue-in-cheek, but just a way of trying to get people to think about it. And hopefully, you still, whenever you're trying to figure out Calvinism and Arminianism, you think if you're bacon burning in the fire because God desires it, Calvinism.
I had a conversation actually with somebody today, actually, about hell. And it comes up
at work.
At work,
you were like, "Hey, we've got to get those numbers. Let me talk to you about Calvinist hell."
It was actually with a prospective client.
Oh, it's even better.
Well, would
you like our services? Now, even if you don't like our services,
well, you might be thinking, how does this come up? Well, I actually don't know how it came up, but he had talked about how he had at one time dated a Jehovah's Witness, and he
they don't believe in hell.
He believed that their version of hell was the best hell.
It literally is.
And I said, "Sir, I would argue
I'll raise you one."
Yeah, I said Latter-day Saint hell is the best of the hells, and it's not even close.
Yeah, because it's not hell.
That's what I said. Because he's like, I like the idea, because he's atheist. He's like, I like the idea of, someone as bad as Hitler and me just not existing anymore. Like that's hell. That's a decent hell.
Your prospective business associate compared himself to Hitler.
Well, he thought that as an atheist, he wouldn't go to a worse place than the worst person, I think was his point. Or possibly he was a Nazi.
I think before you close the deal on this, you're going to want to know whether or not he's a Nazi. I feel like, did you tell him you were Jewish?
I did wish him a happy Passover at the end.
Okay, that's why he went there.
I don't think so. I did close the meeting with, well, happy Passover. Well, anyway, but one thing that he said that I thought was actually interesting is he asked his girlfriend what heaven is like. What's the point of this, right? And she said, well, I mean, I'll live forever. I'll be able to explore the oceans and be able to explore the earth. And he said, okay, so 1 billion years exploring the ocean, then what? 1 billion years exploring the earth, then what? And it's funny, I've never actually heard of heaven put in that kind of a context before, and it was a fascinating actually discussion to think about of Christian heaven. I mean, for us, where it's like, well, okay,
now the work's just getting started.
Yeah, now we got. What are we doing? 1 billion years? Oh,
yeah,
geez.
This was just the pretest.
Yeah, if the entire purpose is the work and the glory is to bring to pass. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting way of Christian heaven that he's like, that sounds all right. So after 2 billion years, now what?
Did you try to teach him the King Follett sermon?
I jumped right into it.
So like every person on my mission.
A little bit. So it was tough because I was like, well, actually, so yeah, I said, this is not necessarily the right place or time, but we've already talked about hell. So,
let's talk about
we
exaltation.
jumped into it a little bit. It was a fascinating thing. I've never gotten that perspective.
What did he say when you told him about exaltation?
It was a fascinating thing that he'd never thought of before. Right.
Yeah.
The idea of, well, no, the purpose of God is to bring us to this, and the purpose of us is to bring, it's just this thing that so eternities of this thing. And I had never, because when you hear a Christian describe heaven, well, it's just the most glorious thing.
You're just in the presence of Jesus. You're praising Jesus. You're throwing crowns at his feet.
At his feet, right?
You're you're in absolute bliss and happiness with the Lord.
So I've never heard someone say, "Okay, but then what?" And honestly, I thought it was actually a pretty decent question. It really was, right?
Yeah.
A very thoughtful, not bad for an atheist.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he's kept that in his back pocket to cross lances with these Christians, whatever he wants.
I'm sure he has, but I had never heard it before, and I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, thank you for that thought-provoking commentary. Please don't make your husband feel too bad about his hatred of camping. For all you know, a tree came through the camper when he was a kid, and he's still dealing with the pain.
This next email comes to us from Brian. Dear Brother Dirk Moss and Professor Richard Leduc, I have been a fan and listener since I first heard Dirk Moss on the Follow Him podcast. I love your podcast. It's been very informative and helpful to address sticky issues. I haven't, about Angel Raphael as an example.
Oh,
it comes up, I can't swing a dead cat.
Yeah, I mean, you were trying to get a business contact. I was just trying to pick up some hot dogs at the store. And
Raphael came up?
Yeah, and so I was like, man, I wish we just knew who Raphael was. They're like, wait a minute. Luckily, have you read Tobit?
It's been informative, helpful. I haven't emailed you before, but Gerrit talks about Wisconsin Mission all the time. My son received his call tonight to Milwaukee. Awesome. He is so excited. I have nothing to ask, but just wanted to thank you for your efforts and the way you address church history. I appreciate the Idaho humor as well as we moved to Rigby a few years ago.
Oh, I bet they know where Chalice is.
Of course. We love the Lord, his church, and his prophet.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And you know what? I don't know your son's name, Brian, but tell him, look, it's going to be a difficult mission, but they have like 20 more members there now than they did 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean,
They announced the temple?
No, people moved in. Okay. People moved in. But here's the thing. People go on missions. Some go to places where they baptize, every other day. Some go to places where no one listens to them at all. Some go places where they, everyone is willing to hear, but no one's willing to commit. No one keeps their commitments. Some people go places where no one listens at all, but if ever anyone does, they do keep their commitments. And, wherever you end up serving the Lord, the most important thing is that you go with a desperate desire to love the people that you're around and to try to help them understand who they really are, why they're here in this world, this vale of tears, and to help remind them of what they have forgotten because of the veil, that we are children of heavenly parents who love us. We're here so that we can become like them. I had a lot of negative experiences in Wisconsin, but I also witnessed miracles. I also experienced things that transformed who I was, and I could safely say that had I not gone to Wisconsin on my mission, I do not believe I would have ever become a religious historian. I always loved history, but it was my mission in Wisconsin that pushed me towards the direction of not just generic history, but what about the history of the kingdom of God on earth? And so tell your son to go find those same investigators that probably are still living in the same houses who didn't show up for their baptism date, and tell them I sent them, and let's see if we can get those people in the water. But in all honesty, tell him thank you for being willing to serve. And he'll love those people. He'll love them. He'll have a hard time at times. He'll have some great times at others. I don't recommend the cow tongue, but other than that.
And have him send us his email, and we'll give him access to the premium stuff. And he's like, no, I'm good. No. You're taking it. He's like, I honestly don't really want to listen. Look, no one wants to listen until they're in the dungeon of Waukesha, Wisconsin, and then Jordan Love, being a Utah State quarterback, is only going to help things. Now, Jordan Love himself is not a Latter-day Saint, but he's from Utah. The state Utah. That's what I'm saying.
It is funny when I told people in Wisconsin that I was from Idaho. It didn't matter how slowly and carefully I said that. The response was still
Des Moines,
Iowa. Yep.
Yeah.
They still.
I got the same in California.
It was crazy. I was like, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Idaho. Oh, by Des Moines.
By there.
I mean, yeah, roughly 1,500 miles away from there. But yeah, I mean, it's in the ballpark. I mean, if you're talking to someone who's a tourist from another country and they ask where you're from, you're like, Los Angeles. Like, oh, you live in LA? Yeah. Because the only two places you know are LA and New York.
Vegas. So. I've started doing Vegas. People know Vegas.
Yeah, you're like, I'm just a hop, skip, and a 6-hour drive outside of Vegas.
Yeah, that's right. Idaho in California was tough because we're almost bordering California.
Right.
So for them to not know that Idaho is a state is staggering.
Right. Where Wisconsin, it was more.
It's further away.
Although, if you live in Idaho now, here's going to be the number one crazy thing that you will notice when you go out there. There's no irrigation systems.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Like at all. And when I was there was even a drought, and everyone was very worried about the drought. There's standing water literally everywhere you look. It's a mosquito's paradise. I mean, it is. There are lakes everywhere. There's water everywhere. Farmers are like, I don't know what we're gonna do. Corn's gonna burn out. You're like, just get a pump, man. Like we can do this by hand.
I remember the first time I flew out to Missouri.
Yeah,
I was flying out, sitting next to a teacher whose husband was a farmer, and we're flying over these fields, and I was a young man. And I said, where's your irrigation? And she said, irrigation? We don't use irrigation. And I said, well, how do you water your crops? And she said, it rains. And I'm like, it rains?
Yep.
What are you talking about?
I growing up in Idaho, I didn't realize how little it rained compared to everywhere else on earth. And I mean like the Sahara Desert. And so, yeah, that is one thing. So he's going to go from a place. Now, here's the nice thing. If your son likes sports, overnight, he's going to become like 20% better at them because he's going from Idaho to sea level. It's like 60 feet above sea level. And you go play your pickup games at the Y and suddenly like, boy, this guy can run all day. Yeah, because his lungs are like, I've never had oxygen before. This is the greatest thing in my life. Anyway, thanks so much, Byron. And tell your son thank you for being willing to serve.
Well, so now we are on to
the second
half of Eliza Dana Gibbs.
Yeah. So to recap, if you haven't listened to the last episode, I recommend that you go do it because we introduced Eliza Gibbs and her awesome conversion story, a miraculous conversion story, and some of the difficulties that she had in standing up for what was right, even though there was so much opposition from her family. We ended off talking about how she came to Nauvoo and they get there right after Joseph is murdered. So she never actually gets to meet Joseph. Well, and then there's the tragedy of the fact that while she gets very sick and almost dies, her sister who joined the church with her does die, as well as her sister's baby. But her sister has a young daughter named Eliza Ann, named after Eliza herself. And Eliza is going to raise Eliza Ann basically as her own child. And so they are getting to Nauvoo, not for the heady days of let's, get the first wall up on that temple and here's the doctrine of baptism for the dead. They're arriving in Nauvoo for the heady days of let's burn down all your crops and threaten to kill everyone. And so almost immediately after they get there, they then have to transition into preparing to leave. And it's a very difficult thing because getting to Nauvoo, they already had almost nothing. Well, now the job that her husband had, okay, his trade was that he was a carpenter who built houses. Talk about all-time bad timing, right? It's like, someone who's trying to sell, mortgages when the interest rate spikes and the housing market goes through the roof. It's like, hey, anyone want to refinance? Refinance? At 9%? What are you talking about? I know it's not that high, but we're going to have multiple mortgage brokers email the podcast and say, it's not 9%. I know it's not 9%.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, if you have,
what my credit's like?
Yeah.
I like how you assume that any mortgage lender listening assumes my credit rating is south of 600. That's what I like.
Well, you're a teacher, right?
It is true. And not just a teacher, I teach religion.
Yeah, that's what
I'm a history teacher that teaches religion. Everybody knows those guys are well off. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, he's getting a nice fat paycheck. So anyway, her husband is a carpenter. Well, everyone's preparing to leave he's a carpenter, especially who builds houses, right? So everyone's getting ready to leave Nauvoo, not build houses. I don't know if he ended up getting some work through other means, but he was working on the temple. So he put some of his carpentry skills to work on the completion of the temple. Of course, by this time, they're really trying to complete the stuff inside of the temple. And all the while, all this persecution is going on. She's going to give birth to a child. Remember, she has a child that she's adopted, basically her sister's child. This is what she writes in her autobiography. Those were days long to be remembered, as indeed were all the days in Nauvoo, filled up with the bitter trials and deep sorrow and mourning. But the Lord strengthened us to struggle through, as he did many others. So it kind of gives you an idea of what it was like. Imagine joining the church, desperate to meet the prophet Joseph Smith, leaving your family, having them all throw you aside, desperately trying to get to Nauvoo, only to get there after Joseph's dead, and you've got rampant mobs just desperately trying to to kill people and to drive the saints from the county. She writes, in the fall, the mob commenced to drive the saints from their settlements in the country, burning their houses, their grain, and shooting down their cattle and stock of all kinds. So these saints, she writes, they fled to Nauvoo for a refuge until every house was filled to overflowing. So in all the outlying areas of Nauvoo, places like Yelrome and Lima, you have the Latter-day Saints who were living in these areas being driven out by these lawless, murderous mobs, burning down their houses. Eventually, they're going to start killing people. And so this is the experience that they have. The house we lived in, they don't live in their own house. The house we lived in was owned by a man who lived in the country and wanted the house. There was not a house or room worthy to name to be rented for any price. And we had to take shelter in a place that was little more than a shelter. It was a clapboarded on outside, but not plastered on the inside. So it's just literally clapboards. No insulation, if you've ever been to Nauvoo in the wintertime, it's not exactly like, it's not Queen Creek, Arizona in the wintertime, just so everyone's aware. It is an hard climate. Let me say that. Have you ever been there in the winter, Richard?
I have, actually.
Yeah. What did it feel like?
It was very, very cold. The wind whipped off the old River Aru, and you were very cold.
There's several places in like the journals that you read where it's so cold in the wintertime that you go to pour out, the water from the wash basin to wash your face in the morning, but it's frozen. So if the water in your pitcher to wash your face is frozen solid inside your house, how cold is your house?
Yeah, that's you grew up in eastern Idaho.
Right.
You're familiar with the cold, but it's next level with the humidity.
Yeah, because
like
it's
Wisconsin.
It's super humid. And it's very much like Wisconsin in that regard. It's super humid, and so the cold just really cuts through you. So as winter comes on, this is a much more difficult thing. And so she's explaining what meager circumstances they lived in. Her mother, remember the mother who eventually tried to prove that the church was false, but then proved it true by reading the Bible, has come with them. She says, mother was quite aged, and she had to sit in the big armchair wrapped in a bed quilt and hold Josiah close to the fire. That's her son, to keep him from freezing. Okay, so it's so cold in the winter, you literally have to sit next to the fire in order to keep any kind of warmth going on. So she writes about how bad it is. And then she says, still, our situation was better than those poor wanderers on the bleak prairies who left their comfortable homes in the tempestuous and stormy month of February, this is February 1846, and crossed the Mississippi on the ice to seek new homes amid the rocky deserts with no shelter save tents and wagon covers. So, they don't leave with the initial companies that are leaving. They don't have the ability to. They're among these people that are they're poor, and it's going to be multiple years of work just to try to save up enough money to be able to afford this really arduous and expensive trek across the country. So she's going to give a little bit of the things that happen as they're trying to do this. But she's also going to talk about some of the false accusations that are made by antagonists, especially once the main body of saints leave. And they want all of the saints out. I've quoted to this audience before the statements of the Warsaw Sentinel, and Warsaw Signal is the same paper, that stated very clearly, we want every Mormon out. We don't want them saying, oh no, I don't believe anymore. And I'm going to say, they say, we want every saint, mongrel or whole blood, removed. In fact, that's the phraseology they use. And if it acts like it's saint or talks like a saint or thinks like a saint. And had they left, so some are saying, oh no, we've left, we're not members. The paper writes, had they left at the height of all of this Mormon villainy, then we'd believe them. And the quote goes on to say, but in deathbed repentance, we have no faith. Yeah, I mean, it is truly, in the truest sense of the word, ethnic cleansing. It is, I want to remove you, even if you say you're not a Mormon anymore. Nope, because the fact that you were ever affiliated with them means you're one of them.
Did those people go on to write the Idaho Constitution? Or?
My guess is yes, because Idaho gets more populated by people moving west, primarily from Illinois and other places in the north. So yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. We have talked about a future episode where we actually dive in, because you sent me down a rabbit hole from the.
Richard's now an expert in Idaho constitutional law.
Well, it was the thing that was stunning to me. The thing that was stunning to me was the conversations that were being held by members of Congress in Washington, D.C. about the Mormons in Idaho.
Yeah, being no better than essentially Aztecs who ripped the beating heart of people out of their chests and threw bodies down the steps.
It's incredible. Like we can do so many parts on just the minutes.
Just what they say.
On the congressional record.
Yeah. Yep. These evil blah, 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 blah. Anyway, to give you an idea of how menacing the mobs are after they leave, in the setting of winter, the mobocracy, which had gradually been increasing after the settling of the Mormons in that part of the country, I guess I should say that they moved to the other side of the river, right? So they crossed the river, they leave Nauvoo itself, and we journeyed to Bonaparte, about 25 miles from Nauvoo, on the opposite side of the river.
Named after Napoleon, who fought a war after the Revolution.
You know what?
How about that?
Now, most people won't know this, though, because they weren't listening to the premium.
I'm an idiot. I'm making fun of myself.
Well, I know, but they won't know the joke, because on the premium, we had a conversation about
the Napoleonic Wars, and about when that happened, and I think they happened in like 1606. Yeah. I don't know.
They happened before.
Yeah, they happened well before.
Of any American colony.
I missed a couple of chapters in high school.
Did I reference the fact that we're from Idaho?
The Louisiana Purchase. I'm familiar with that.
Oh, yes.
Thomas. Lewis and Clark was the entire fourth grade.
Oh yeah, most of Idaho history is Lewis and Clark.
Oh, that's all it is.
We would build a shrine to Lewis and Clark
at Sacagawea.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Sacagawea, Lewis and Clark. That's it. I mean, is there anything else we even talked about?
How did I? I just. Do
you remember
much shame on my family?
Do you remember the song? Did you have to learn the song?
The
state song?
And here we have Idaho.
Yeah. Here we have Idaho,
winning her way to fame.
Winning her way to fame.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Silver and gold, right?
Yeah, it's classic.
And romance lies in her name. Oh,
yeah,
man.
That's good. Takes me back.
Does anyone else know their state anthem? I'm always jealous of my daughter because she goes to a university.
Your daughter.
She goes.
How old is your daughter?
You know what? She'll never go to a university.
She's wicked smart.
She goes.
She's 9, 10.
She goes to a grade school, not a university. I don't know what's wrong. I'm having a hard time today. When we were about to start the podcast, I asked Richard, how do I start the podcast? And he looked at me as if I was kidding. But in that moment, I wasn't kidding. I was like, I don't remember what we say.
We've done 243 of these.
Well, it just shows how badly we've done them. Anyway, my daughter at her grade school, they have a school song they sing every week. The Sierra Bonita Bears.
Oh, okay. So that's Sand Spring Elementary, the best school in the land.
They did have a better song. Yeah, Sand Springs Elementary.
Oklahoma's got a great state song.
Oh, sure.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when it's written by Rodgers and Hammerstein.
See, and that's what Idaho lacked. Part of the problem of being, as bigoted as their constitution was, is you don't get the same Rodgers and Hammerstein treatment. That's what I think. Right?
If you keep our people out.
That's funny. Anyway, so she's explaining just how horrible this is right here. In the winter mobocracy, which had been gradually been increasing after the settling of the Mormons in that part of the country. So they move over to Iowa. So they get out of Nauvoo where most of the violence is. They're 25 miles away. Well, guess what, though? Anywhere you go as a Mormon refugee, you can't have too many of you collect before people start saying, hey, there's a bunch of Mormons moving into our neighborhood. And Mormons are so thoroughly hated in the United States at that time that there are very few open arms for these refugees being driven out of their homes. In Farmington, a place 5 miles from Bonaparte, they would take a man if they knew he was a Mormon and they would hang him up on a tree or anything that would answer their purposes in the street in open daylight. They would hang him until he was nearly dead before taking him down. She goes on to say that there was someone who did die in consequence of this kind of violence. They would cut holes in the ice in the river, and they would hold people in the water until they were nearly dead. These outrages were perpetrated without preferring any charge. But these outrages, although frequent in occurrence, did not satisfy their diabolical thirst for malice and unprovoked spite. The spirit which raged with violence and savage cruelty in Illinois and in Missouri was exhibited in Farmington in the vindictive spirit in which they sought to harass and persecute the saints. They commenced to arrest them on the pretense of theft without a shadow of proof, unless, of course, someone was bribed to perjure themselves, which was common. The justice of the peace in Farmington told the people that he would commit every Mormon they would bring before him, and he kept his word sacredly. Not one escaped commitment, meaning that going to jail. Some gave bail, to await the sitting of the grand jury, and those who did not were sent to Kusaqua. There's no way I'm saying that right.
Andrea,
Kusaqua.
Yeah, we're mispronouncing all over.
Kusaqua.
I think that's it.
I don't think so.
Okay. We're slaughtering
so
names.
So look, if you happen to be a member of the church in rural eastern Iowa and you're listening to this podcast,
well, there's a ward in Keokuk, right?
This is 25 miles away from there.
Okay.
So
yeah, in the same ward.
So in the same stake.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm looking up. All right, I'm going to get our crack research staff on the ward boundaries of Keokuk.
Yep. Anyway, a log building with large cracks between the logs. They were sent there to this jail in Kusaqua. Again, I apologize to everyone in Iowa. There's no way I'm saying that right.
I'm trying to look how to even spell Kusaqua.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, that's exactly how I thought it was.
Oh, yeah. Well, I assume. They were sent there the 1st of January in a very severe winter, and there's essentially large gaps in the logs that is this jail. So you're just suffering in the middle of this Iowa winter. They were also put in irons in that cold place and no chance for a fire. My husband, William, was one of those unfortunates whom these malicious demons had selected on whom to vent their hellish rage. Notwithstanding that he had been steady all the time at the mill and he hadn't lost a day, he was arrested on the 1st day of January and he was held in confinement 8 weeks.
Wow.
I visited him twice in the forepart of his confinement, but then I was taken sick and brought to the verge of the grave. Nature gave way under the severe trial. The strain on my naturally nervous system was unendurable, and I sank beneath its direful influence, but my end was not yet. So remember, she's already been miraculously healed by Orson Pratt when she first got to Nauvoo. And this trial is going to end because of someone, she doesn't name who it is, that there's a habeas corpus that's issued to take them to Iowa City, where we could get a fair trial before the chief judge of the territory, who was a very impartial and just man. They told me that they had investigated the case and that there was nothing against my husband to hold him. They were all set at liberty in Iowa City, and the justice of the peace from Farmington received a severe lecture from the judge. That's very nice. So you were falsely imprisoning, beating, nearly drowning, strangling people because of their religion, but I gave him a good talking to. I told him just how disappointed I was.
It's the Iowa City, Iowa Stake, the Fairfield Ward.
The Iowa City. That's how many miles away?
It's a bit of
60?
It's a decent. I'm going to get our crack research stuff.
Okay,
on
yeah.
that
Richard's
as well.
going to let us know just how far you have to go in Iowa. It's
Quetzalcoatl to Fairfield's a bit of a haul, by the way, by itself. So
right.
Yeah.
So she had to
Saints.
pack a lunch.
Yeah, Saints out east. They have to travel a little bit.
If you happen to be a member of the church in that stake, we'll send you a hat. In honor of the territorial chief judge saying, "Hey, don't do that anymore. That illegal attacking of people." Richard, are you okay?
We'll send you a hat.
Richard just pushed his chair all the way across the room, so you're not going to be able to hear him.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
So they get sick, and that is a rough thing. But they really want to make it out to where the rest of the saints are. They want to get out to Mount Pisgah and the other places in Iowa where the saints have their way stations as they're on their way. But her son Josiah gets very sick, and she sees in this yet another miracle. She writes, "When in Nauvoo, William and I had our patriarchal blessings under the hand of Patriarch John Smith." So that's Joseph Smith's uncle. George A. Smith's dad is John Smith. "In my blessing, he told me that I should have power to preserve the lives of my children until they are old. And I had implicit faith in that promise. And I verily believe that it was through that promise that I saved my son from the fell destroyer. For I claimed him at the hands of the Lord through that promise. And to God, by all the glory, he spared him, and he raised him up to manhood to obey the gospel in its fullness, even the celestial law of marriage, for which he may have to pay the penalty of imprisonment. If so, the will of God be done." So she's talking about the fact that her son actually practices polygamy in Utah. When spoiler alert, they eventually make it to Utah. Great. I just ruined it for everybody.
They did.
And I said the word polygamy. Now, she's going to have another child, but they are still just desperately trying to make ends meet. And it's 2 steps forward and about 7 steps back for them as they keep trying to do this. She's going to have a lot of difficulties and trials. I'm not going to read all of them, but eventually her dear mother, who had accompanied her on all of this, she's going to pass away. So one of the reasons why they weren't able to leave is, she was so sick. She grew gradually weaker and weaker. And in 1854, her mother dies. 1854. 1851, her mother dies. In 1854. So now the Saints have been out in Salt Lake now for almost 7 years at this point. She gives birth to another daughter. They name her Medora Victoria. I don't know if I'm saying Medora right. I mean,
it's on theme with the show.
Yeah. Yep. Every name that we've ever read, we don't know how to pronounce.
That looks right.
Maybe. Sure. I mean, Medora kind of looks like it.
Yeah.
So here they are still struggling and striving, and they finally have gotten enough money together that they are going to try to make it out in 1857. Her brother, who was a missionary in England, he writes them and says, "Hey, I'm gonna be on my way back in 1857. I want to meet you in Iowa City, and we'll cross the plains together to go to Salt Lake." Well, they end up missing her brother, and she writes, "We were left to travel alone or join a Danish company who could not speak a word of English." The captain of the company, however, was not Danish, and he was very anxious for us to go with him. I'm sure, because you're the only other people speak English. I mean, it was odd. We've always talked about that, how, your parochialism stops the further away you get from your home, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
in your own town, like the rival high school that's literally in the same town. Duh, I hate those guys. Can't believe that, right. I'm sure Richard has, all kinds of stories from.
So I covered an international territory. I traveled quite a bit for work. You leave Utah or leave Idaho. You're in New York. You meet someone from Utah or Idaho. Oh, hey, Utah, Idaho. It doesn't matter what high school you went to. All of a sudden,
even though it's like the rival. That you can't
oh
stand,
my gosh, Nampa High, come
it's
here.
So good to see
oh
you.
my goodness, yeah, right. Then you leave there and you go to Europe, and you're in England, and you meet anyone from the States. And then you go to France and you meet anyone that speaks English.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone is like, you're from Britain. That's
oh my
people.
gosh, I love you. Yeah,
I wish we had gone with George III. Thank you for knowing English. So they're eventually going to make it, but they go out with this company, and they are literally just ahead of the army that's being sent to Utah during the Utah War. That's 1857. So they're hearing all of these reports of the army that's coming behind them, but they end up getting there before the troops. But they're making that whole journey, that whole walk, in fear because they know the army is coming. When we got to nearly Black Fork, President Young sent some fresh teams as ours were getting footsore, which made it slow traveling, and it was feared that the troops would overtake us before we got to Salt Lake City. So they get there before the troops do. And as soon as they get there, they rent a house, they get ready, and then Brigham Young orders everyone to leave Salt Lake and to move south because they're worried that the city is going to be occupied. So you get a little bit of this pioneer story of this unsung but yet very faithful Latter-day Saint. Now they're gonna move out of Salt Lake. And it's a pretty bittersweet move for her. That she likes living where they're living, but her niece, who really acts like her daughter, I mean, she's raised her from the time she was a teeny little girl, and she's so close to her, Eliza Ann. Well, she marries a guy, and they move. They're going to move down to Fillmore. Okay, Fillmore, not very close to Salt Lake. But, at the time, the territorial capital, they're trying to make a go of it. And she talks about how she's doesn't want to move at all. Like, I tried my best to comfort myself with the reflection that I would be with Eliza Ann again. Okay, so she loves this niece/daughter of hers so much that even though this is a tough move for her, she's going to move down there and she's going to be with her daughter/niece. And we sold our place for a mere trifle compared with its real value and invested our interest in Fillmore. This was the last day of the year 1863, December 25th. The last of the year, December 25th. We remained with Mr. Trescott, that's Eliza Ann's husband, and wife, for about 2 weeks, and then we rented 2 rooms in William King's house. In February 1864, Eliza Ann gave birth to a daughter and then died a few hours afterwards, thus leaving me desolate and forlorn and nearly heartbroken in a strange land, a place that was repugnant to me from the first and much more so always after the death of Eliza Ann. So here's this, essentially her first child, because she adopted her before she even had her own child. And as all too often happened in the 19th century, childbirth is incredibly dangerous for women. And Eliza Ann dies in childbirth. And it's obviously devastating. And we don't know much about that devastation. I wish I had more sources to cull from to talk about some of the aspects of her life. But I will tell you, shortly before that tragedy happened, one of the things that we have from Eliza Gibbs is a letter that she writes to Brigham Young in 1862. So this is right before the terrible difficulties, she writes it, and what it is a giant poem that she's written in honor of Brigham Young. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's like a Beowulf type. I mean, this is
it's an epic.
This is, Shakespeare's got nothing on her, but it's our chieftain, is what she calls it, to the tune of Mountain Dell. So you're to sing it, right? Where is the man beneath the sun that can be found, who hath achieved such victories with blessings? I'm reading this from the original, and it is very poor copy, so I really should have done some prep work and transcribed this. But that would require us to spend more time, and obviously we don't. Maybe we should have spent less time talking about a tree limb coming through a camper. I now regret everything I've ever done in my life. As to whom the great King of Kings, the mighty Elohim, hath called his kingdom to set up and rear it to his name. The world may boast of Bonaparte,
Yep, there it is. Yep.
And Alexander too, and hosts of others who like them have filled the world with woe and blood and fire and ruin, marked their cruel, heartless course, and thus brought down upon their heads the widow's direful curse. So she's talking about how, Brigham Young's going to be someone different. Again, it goes on for a while, but I'll give you the closing part of it so you can get a little bit more of an idea of who Eliza Ann is. Again, she's sending this in 1862, March of 1862, which is the middle of the Civil War, the American Civil War. She's sending it to Brigham Young, and in honor of him. But so here is the way that she ends off this epic poem. Then will, as Daniel did predict, the little stone roll forth, cut from the mountain without hands, and soon 'twill fill the earth. All hail our mighty chieftain. Hail the mouthpiece of our God. His word is law, yet mild and wise. 'Tis not enforced with blood. Brother Young. She then writes a little note at the end of it. The above lines are the production of some of my ideas thrown together amid the cares and perplexity of my household duties. I have not much time for study or reflection, therefore you will please overlook their imperfection. I thought I would send them to you, and if they meet your approbation and you consider them worthy of a place in the news, they are at your disposal. With due respect, I remain, Eliza Gibbs. So that's a letter that she sends there to Brigham Young. Now, part of the reason why Eliza came to mind is some of the greatest correspondence that we have isn't between her and Brigham Young. In fact, and unfortunately, it's a one-sided correspondence that we have from another prophet who is responding to her after yet another tragedy occurred in her life. The death of Eliza Ann was obviously incredibly difficult for her. Well, years later, she's going to suffer yet another horrible experience where her daughter Medora is going to marry. She actually marries the same man that her daughter Imogene is also married to. So this happens a lot, that sisters will marry the same man, and in the practice of plural marriage. And so Medora is going to get married, and she's going to be having a child. Well, not only does Medora die, the child dies as well. And both her husband and Eliza, so both, the Medora's husband and Eliza both write letters to Wilford Woodruff, who at the time is the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. This is in the 1880s. So, John Taylor is the prophet, but Wilford Woodruff is the president of the Quorum of the 12. And also, I think they're familiar with him because they had spent time in St. George as well, right? So, in any case, she writes to Wilford Woodruff. We don't know exactly what she says. This is in 1883. So 1883, things are going off the rails a lot for the Latter-day Saints. In 1882, they've passed the update essentially to the Moral Anti-Bigamy Act that had already made polygamy illegal. Well, then they passed the Edmunds Act that puts all kinds of teeth into that law. And there are federal agents swarming the territory trying to arrest men and women for unlawful cohabitation. So it's a tough time. And during that time, Wilford Woodruff tours several of the places, branches of the church, primarily in Colorado and other places. And when he gets home, he finds these letters waiting for him. Again, we don't know exactly what was sent. But I think I'll start with the shorter letter that was sent by James Melville, who was Medora's husband. And you have to just try to discern what did he write about the death of his wife and his mother-in-law, Eliza, by what he says. This is Wilford Woodruff's response to him. Elder James Melville, dear brother, I wish to say that I'm away from home attending conferences a good share of my time. I've been on a mission to Emery County, Denver, and Manassas, Colorado, having traveled some 2,000 miles in 2 weeks. And on my return to the office, I found quite a file of letters awaiting me from different parts of the territory. Among the number was one from you and one of 8 pages from your mother-in-law concerning the death of your wife and child. And Sister Gibbs asked a great many questions which she wished me to answer, and also my wife, Phoebe Woodruff. So far as she is concerned, she is not in very good health. Phoebe's not. And not in a situation to answer by writing, and I have not time to enter into all the particulars of her questions. But I will write to her and answer what I can. Concerning your letter and questions, I will say that it is all right with the mother and the child. You did not tell me whether the child was alive when taken from the mother and blessed and named. I should not consider it proper to bless and name a dead child. So apparently he describes what happens, and it's not clear to President Woodruff whether or not it was a stillborn child or whether the child died shortly after. And so he must have said, Brother Melville must have said, we blessed the child right away. And so Wilford Woodruff's responding, I should not consider it proper to bless and name a dead child. Now that might sound a little harsh, but of course he's trying to declare doctrine for the church. But then he goes on to say, not that there is any particular sin in it. But when a child or other person is dead, we should not consider it proper to administer to them unless we were impressed with faith and power to bring it to life. I will write to your mother-in-law, which I wish you to deliver to her. Your brother in the gospel, Wilford Woodruff. This is a touching letter to me just in the first part that Wilford Woodruff is going to, he literally comes back to, I'm sure, hundreds of letters. But this is the one he's going to spend his time responding to. Well, he writes to Eliza Gibbs. Sister Eliza Gibbs, your letter of June 17th is before me, as is Brother Melville's. And I've stated to him my situation, away from home a great deal of the time and attending conferences and having heavy correspondence and being full of business, so that I cannot do justice in answering so many critical questions as you ask in your letter. But I will answer the best I can. I shall have to answer for Mrs. Woodruff, as she is not in a situation to write letters much at present. not being in very good health. And now you can start to feel just the abject sorrow of Eliza as she's writing this letter. Again, I wish I had her letter to read to you, but I don't have it. This is what Wilford Woodruff writes back to her. You say that you have a great desire to communicate with your daughter since her death, and have prayed for it long and loud, and the request is not granted. And you feel sorely tried because it is not, and are almost ready to turn infidel because the Lord does not grant your request. That phraseology, turn infidel, if you remember, you got to go back an episode, but that's exactly the phraseology she used when she couldn't reconcile the idea of a just and loving God and a hell that almost everyone goes to. She said it almost made her turn infidel. It almost made her stop believing in God. And you are almost ready to turn infidel because the Lord does not grant your request. I wish to say to you, Sister Gibbs, that you are asking something of the Lord that it is not wisdom in him to bestow. As soon as the spirit leaves the body and goes back to the Father who gave it, there are laws governing that spirit so that it cannot return to its friends on earth. And if it was granted to spirits, it might cost them a great deal of sorrow. I have known persons to make covenants together, to return after death, to visit a husband, a wife, or parents. But after death, they never came back to fulfill their pledge, for they found a law to forbid it. To answer all such questions, I will say that the Lord never sends an angel to the earth to visit anybody unless he has a message to be delivered or a work to be performed that cannot be attended to otherwise. And it is the same with departed spirits. They never return to communicate with the living on earth only by permission to deliver a message, but not to gratify the desire of a husband or wife or parents or children. And in that light you should look upon it. And not because you have done wrong or because the Lord does not hear your prayer. Obviously, part of what she wrote was, I guess I've just been so much a sinner that my daughter's not coming back to speak to me the way I wanted her to. And so Wilford Woodruff advises her, it's not because you're a sinner. It's not because God isn't there not hearing your prayer. It's because there are laws that exist for spirits in the afterlife. He goes on to share something from Orson Pratt, again, one of the leaders of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Orson Pratt told me once that he had prayed for months for the Lord to send him an angel, but the Lord did not do it. For he had no message to send him. For he had already learned all that was necessary for him to know through the messages given to Joseph Smith by the angels who visited him. I do not think that it is wisdom for you to ask the Lord any more to send your daughter to you. For if it had been wisdom, God would have granted that request long ago. With regard to the laws that govern spirits when they leave their tabernacles and go into the spirit world, they are not revealed to us, but to a very limited extent. Now, I think part of the reason why she had a question about Phoebe Woodruff is Phoebe Woodruff had nearly died once before and had what some might call a near-death experience. And so I think that's why she was so desperate to what happened with Phoebe when she was. So she's obviously heard this story probably from Phoebe, because President Woodruff certainly acts like they're on familiar terms, I would say. Concerning your questions to Mrs. Woodruff, I may not be able to answer all, but I will say, when the spirit left the body, it did not leave the room. She looked upon her body and upon those in the room. The two persons who brought in her coffin were like other persons. They did not see any other persons besides, and felt that it would have been a relief to have continued in the spirit world, but chose to return for her husband's and her child's sake. So she's talking about, apparently Phoebe Woodruff had this near-death experience and had made this choice to return. The spirit has a spiritual tabernacle the same size as the body. Your grandchild will be with her mother, and she will have the care of it until the resurrection. She has obeyed the celestial law, and she will inherit a celestial kingdom. No person who keeps the celestial law and dies goes to the spirit world and has any desire to come back to this wicked world. And you ought to be reconciled to her departure to a better state. She is a great deal better off than those of us who remain. I got no particulars of her death, only that she died in childbed. Both male and female have a work to perform in the spirit world, the same as in this life, according to the sphere they occupy. If there is anything left undone for your daughter, it should be done in the temple. It is your duty and the duty of all saints to go into a temple when they have the opportunity and do the work for their dead. No man knows when Christ will come. It is not revealed the day or hour. I do not know whether Joseph or Hiram will receive their bodies before Christ comes or not. So apparently one of her questions is, will Joseph and Hiram be resurrected before the second coming? Wilford Woodruff, I don't know. He closes off, your brother in the gospel, Wilford Woodruff. There are so many beautiful parts to this letter, and teaching us doctrine about the spirit world that we don't know very much about it. We have all kinds of thoughts in our heads about what it'll be like and how it'll be and what will happen. But the Lord in his wisdom has seen fit to not reveal very much about it. I don't know how Eliza Gibbs received this, but I do know that she remained a faithful member of the church. When she died in Deseret, which is where she lived, the small community of Deseret, this was the news article that accompanied it. Mrs. Eliza Gibbs died yesterday after an illness of only a few hours. She was 86 years of age. She came to Utah with Johnson's army and has been a diligent worker in the church from that time until her death. She leaves a host of relatives and friends to mourn her loss. Part of the reason why you study these amazing women and men from the past is you see them persevere through the horrors and the trials of this mortal life. And hopefully we gain just a little bit, just a small piece of courage to push through our own trials. Stephanie, you shared a difficult trial. And my belief is that eventually all of your suffering and all of your losses will be made up to you. I study someone like Eliza Gibbs, who has every reason in the world to give up on this faith and to say God must not be there. And she doesn't. She continues to serve and work, and not with fanfare, and not because everyone knows who she is, and not because people are giving, talks in general conference about her, but just because it's right and she believes. I believe that we will see our loved ones again after this life, and so I'm grateful for President Woodruff's sharing of this. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. And that is the starting point of knowing that Jesus died for us and that everything will eventually be made right. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.